Chapter 2 of Blackbeard Buccaneer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carlos Recio. Titled by Ralph D. Paine. Chapter 2. The Merchant Trader, Plymouth Adventure. Rubbing his ear, which Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes had soundly boxed before releasing him, Jack marched along in gloomy silence until he was conducted into his small, unplastered room. His uncle stalked out and shot the ponderous bolt behind him. Passing through the kitchen, he halted to scold the black cook as a lazy slattern, and then sat himself down to a lonely meal. Jack was a problem which the finicky middle-aged bachelor had been unable to solve. He had undertaken the care of the boy after his parents had died in the same week of a mysterious fever which ravaged the settlement. The uncle failed to realize how fast this strapping youngster was growing into manhood. He disliked punishing him and was usually unhappy after one of these stormy episodes. Mr. Peter Forbes pecked at his dinner with little appetite, and his plump face was clouded. Shoving back his chair, he paced the floor in a fidgety manner, and, at length, opened the door of Jack's room. The hungry prisoner was lounging upon a wooden settle, his chin in his hand, while he sullenly stared at the wall. Always mindful of his manners, he slowly rose to his feet and waited for another scolding. "I wish we might avoid such scenes as these, Jack," sadly observed Uncle Peter, his hot temper cooled. "No sooner do you leave my sight than some new mischief is afoot." "You do not understand, sir," impatiently protested the nephew. "In your eyes I am still the urchin who came out of England clinging to his dear mother's skirts. Would ye have me pass my time with girls, or have no other friends than snuffy old Parson Throckmorton, my tutor, who tries to pound the Greek and Latin into my thick skull?" "He is a wise and ripened scholar who wastes his effort," was the dry comment. "Most of the lads of the town are coarse louts who pattern after the ribald elders, Jack. They will lead you into evil courses." "I shall always pray God to be a gentleman, sir," was the spirited response, "but I must learn to fight my own battles. Were it not for hardy pastimes with these other stout lads, think you I could have cracked the crown of a 6-foot pirate?" Uncle Peter gazed at the boy before he spoke. Tanned and hard and muscular, this was a nephew to be proud of, a man in deeds if not in years, and there was unswerving honesty in the straight mouth and firm chin. The guardian sighed, and then annoyance got the better of his affection, as he burst out, "Perdition take all pirates! You were cozened by this hell-rake of a Stede Bonnet, and thought it a rare pleasure. John Spencer Cockerell, own nephew to the Secretary of the Colony." "I did but copy older men of fair repute," demurely answered Jack, a twinkle in his eye. "Greybeards of Parson Throckmorton's flock traffic in merchandise with the pirates, and are mighty civil to them, I note." "A vile business," cried Uncle Peter. "It was decided at the recent conference in Virginia that I should go to England as a delegate to lay before His Majesty's government such evidence as might invoke aid in our campaign against the pirates. It was my intention to leave you in care of Parson Throckmorton, Jack, but I have now resolved to take you with me, and you will remain at school in England. No more of this boon comradeship with villains like Stede Bonnet." Poor Jack looked most unhappy at the tidings. It was not at all in accord with his ambitions. Here was worse punishment than he had dreamed his uncle could inflict. Dolefully he exclaimed, "To live in tame and stupid England, locked up in a school? Why, I am big enough to join the forays against the Indians, or to fight bloody battles against the pirates if you really mean to chastise them, but I cannot promise to attack Captain Bonnet. He is a friend of mine." "You shall come to see him hanged," shouted Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes, very red in the face. "The merchant ship Plymouth Adventure is expected soon, and you and I shall take passage in her for merry England, thanking heaven to see the last of the barbarous Carolinas for a time." "Think your own think, sir," grumbled Jack. "Captain Bonnet may be a pirate, but he is not nearly so heartless as my own uncle. He asked me to dinner at the tavern. I am faint for lack of food. My stomach sticks to my ribs. 'Tis a great pity you were never growing boy yourself. For a platter of cold meat and bread I will take my oath to chop you a pile of firewood as high as the kitchen." The jailer relented and bustled out to ransack the pantry. Having demolished a joint and a loaf, young John Spencer Cockerell was in a mood much less melancholy. In fact, when he swung the axe behind the fence of hewn palings, he was humming the refrain of that wicked ditty, "Yo-ho with rum below." He was tremendously sorry that he had been snatched away from the engaging society of Captain Bonnet and his wild crew, and the future had a gloomy aspect, but even these grievances were forgotten when he described, in a lane which led past the house, the lovely maid whose cause he had championed at the wharf. She was Dorothy, only daughter of Colonel Malcolm Stuart, who commanded the militia forces of the colony, Although she was the elder by 2 or 3 years and gave herself the airs of a young lady, Jack Cockerell hopelessly, secretly adored her. It was an anticlimax for a hero to be serving out his sentence at the woodpile, and he turned his back to the gate while he made the chips fly. But Dorothy had no intention of ignoring him. She paused with a smile so winsome that Jack's heart fluttered, and he dropped the axe to grasp her outstretched hand. He squeezed it so hard that Dorothy winced as she said, "What a masterful man it is, but please don't crush my poor fingers. I fled from those pirates at the wharf, Jack, instead of waiting to offer you my most humble thanks. Will you accept them now? They come straight from the heart." For such a reward as this, Jack would have fought a dozen pirates. Baring his head, he murmured bashfully, "A trifling service, Mistress Dorothy, and 'tis my devout hope that I may always be ready in time of need." "So," she exclaimed, with mischief in her eyes, "I believe you would slay a pirate each morning before breakfast should I ask it." "Or any other small favors like that," gallantly returned Jack. "A proper courtier," cried Dorothy. "My father will thank you when he returns from North Carolina. When I ventured to the wharf this morning, it was in hopes of sighting his armed sloop." The dwelling of Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes was at some distance from the tavern, which was on the sloping ground that overlooked the harbor, among the spreading live oaks and magnolias. Borne on the breeze came the sound of Stede Bonnet's pirates at their revels, pistol shots, wild choruses, drunken yells. Jack was not disturbed, although Mistress Dorothy moved closer and laid a hand on his arm. Presently the tumult ceased, abruptly, and now Jack was perplexed. It might mean a sudden recall to the ship. Something was in the wind. The youth and the maid stood listening. Jack was about to scramble to the roof of the house in order to gaze toward the harbor, but Dorothy bade him stay with her. Her fair cheek had paled, and she shivered with a vague apprehension. The sudden stillness was uncanny, threatening. Soon, however, a trumpet blew a long, shrill call to arms, and they heard one hoarse, jubilant huzzah after another. "Have Stede Bonnet's pirates mustered to sack the town?" implored Dorothy. "I can speedily find out," replied her protector. "Oh, I pray you not to leave me," she tremulously besought him. "Captain Bonnet will wreak no harm on Charlestown," Jack assured her. "I know him too well for that. You saw what he did to the base varlet who annoyed you at the wharf, felled him like an ox. If only my father were here to call out the troops and rout this rabble of sea rogues, Jack dear," was her fluttering prayer. A little after this the tumult increased, and it was drawing nearer. It was a martial clamor of men on the march, with the rattle of drums and a loud fanfare of trumpets. Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes came running out of the house, all flustered and waving his hands, and ordered the 2 young people indoors. The servants were closing the heavy wooden shutters and sliding the bars across the doors. Jack slipped out into the lane and hailed a neighbor who dashed past. The news was babbled in fragments, and Jack scurried back to blurt to his uncle. "An Indian raid! The savages are within a dozen miles of Charlestown, laying waste the plantations, slaying the laborers. The militia is called to arms, but they lack a leader. Colonel Stewart is sorely missed. Captain Bonnet called another boatload of his pirates ashore, and they march in the van to assail the Indians. May I go with them, Uncle Peter? Must I play the coward or the laggard?" "Nonsense, John Cockerell. These mad pirates have addled your wits. Shall I let you be scalped by these painted fiends of Yemassees?" "Then you will volunteer in my stead," shrewdly ventured Jack, with a glance at Dorothy. Duty and my official cares prevent," quoth the worshipful secretary of the colony, frowning and pursing his lips. Dorothy smiled at this and winked at Jack. Uncle Peter was rated a better lawyer than a valiant man of war. "Let us stand at a window," exclaimed the girl. "Ah, they come! My faith, but this is a brave array, and Captain Bonnet leads them well." She had never expected to praise a pirate, but there was no denying that this lean, straight rover in the scarlet coat and great cocked hat looked the part of a competent and intrepid soldier. He was superbly fit for the task in hand. Catching sight of Jack Cockerell and Dorothy Stewart in the window, he saluted by raising the hilt of his cutlass, and his melancholy visage brightened in a smile. Behind him tramped his men in columns of force, matchlocks across their shoulders, bright weapons swinging against their thighs as they sang all together and kept step to the beat of the drums. "But here to execution bay, the wind these bones do blow. I'll drink and fight what's left away, yo-ho with the rum below." Behind these hardy volunteers straggled as many of the militia company as had been able to answer the sudden call. Merchants, clerks, artisans, and vagabonds who seemed none too eager to meet the bloodthirsty Yemassees. Their wives and children trailed after them to the edge of the town, amidst tears and loud lamentations. The contrast did not escape the eye of Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes, who reluctantly admitted, "Give the devil his due, say I. These wicked brethren of the coast go swaggering off their own free will, as though it were to a frolic. I will remember it in their favor when they come to hang." A long roll of the drums, and a lilting flourish by the pirate trumpeter as a farewell to Charlestown and its tavern and its girls, and the company passed from view. The lane was again deserted and silent, and Jack offered to escort Dorothy Stewart to her own home. As they loitered across an open field, he cried in a fierce flare of rebellion, "My good uncle will drive me too far. Let him sail for old England, and leave me to find my own career. Upon my soul, I may run away to join a pirate ship." Dorothy tried to look grave at this dreadful announcement, but a dimple showed in her cheek as she replied, "My dear Jack, you can never be braver, but you will be wiser some day. Banish such silly thoughts. You must obey your lawful guardian." "But did you see the lads in the militia company? 2 or 3 of them I have whipped in fair fight, and Uncle Peter wants to keep me tucked in a cradle." "Softly, Jack," said she, with pretty solicitude. "Stede Bonnet has bewitched you utterly." The stubborn youth shook his head. This day of humiliation had been the last straw. He was ripe for desperate adventure. It would have made him happy and contented to be marching against the Indians with Stede Bonnet and his cutthroats, in peril of tomahawks and ambuscades. Small wonder that poor Jack Cockerell's notions of right and wrong were rather confused, for he lived in an age when might ruled blue water, when every ship was armed, and merchant seamen fought to save their skins as well as their cargoes. English, French, Spanish, and Dutch, they plundered each other on the flimsiest pretexts, and the pirates harried them all. Still sulky, Jack betook himself to the rectory next morning for his daily bout with his studies. Parson Throckmorton was puttering in the garden, a shrunken little man who wore black small clothes, lace at his wrists, and a powdered wig. Opening the silver snuff-box, he almost sneezed the wig off before he tripped. He reminded me of Will Shakespeare's whining schoolboy, Master John, creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. A treat is in store for us today, a signal treat. We begin our Virgil, Arma virumque cano. Arms and a man? I like that much of it, glowered the mutinous scholar, but my uncle makes me sing a different tune. He accepted my advice that you be educated in England, said the parson. Then I may hold you responsible for this hellish thing, angrily declaimed Jack. Were it not for your white hairs. He subsided and had the grace to apologize as they entered the library. The tutor was an impatient old gentleman, and the pupil was so inattentive that his knuckles were sharply rapped with a ruler. A blunder more glaring, and the ruler came down with another whack. This was too much for Jack, who jumped up, rubbed his knuckles, and shouted, "Enough, sir. I would have you know that I all but killed a big, ugly pirate yesterday." "So rumour informs me," rasped Parson Throckmorton, "but you will give yourself no grand airs with me. Construe this passage properly, or I must tan those leather breeches with a limber rod." This was too much for the insulted Jack, who slammed down the book, clapped on his hat, and tramped from the room in his high dudgeon. Such scurvy treatment as this was fairly urging him to a life of crime on the rolling ocean. He wandered down to the wharf, and wistfully gazed at the lawless brig, Royal James, which swam at her anchorage in trim and graceful beauty. A few men moved briskly on deck, painting the bulwarks or polishing brass. Evidently Stede Bonnet had sent off word to be all taut and ready to hoist sail for another cruise. After a while, the Trant went homeward and manfully confessed to the quarrel with Parson Throckmorton. Uncle Peter Forbes was amazingly mild. There was no gusty outbreak of temper, and in fact, he had little to say. It was in his mind to patch up a truce with his troublesome nephew pending their departure for England. He even suggested that the studies be dropped and advised Jack to go fishing in his canoe. Several days later, Captain Bonnet and his pirates came back from their foray against the Indians. They were a footsore, weary band, the wounded carried in litters and several men missing. Their gay garments were caked with mud, the finery all tatters, and most of them were marked with cuts and scratches, but they pulled themselves together and swaggered into Charlestown as boldly as ever to the music of trumpet and drum. Stede Bonnet carried an arm in a sling. As he passed the secretary's house, he cheerily called out to Jack, "Ahoy, my young comrade! 'Twill please you to know that fair Mistress Dorothy Stewart may sleep in peace." "Did he scatter the savages, sir?" asked Jack, running out to shake his hand. "God bless ye, boy, we exterminated 'em." The gratitude of Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes was stronger than his dislike, and he came out to thank the captain in behalf of the citizens of Charlestown. To his excited questions the pirate replied, "There be old buccaneers from Hispaniola in my crew, may it please your excellency, fellows who hunted the Indians in their youth, tracked 'em like hounds through forest and bayou. Others served their time with the logwood cutters of Yucatan. They laughed at the tricks of these Yemassees of the Carolinas." One of the militia company broke in to say to Mr. Forbes, "Your Honor's own plantation was saved from the torch by this doughty Captain Bonnet. It was there he pulled the flint arrowhead from his arm, and was near bleeding to death." Mr. Peter Forbes could do no less than invite the pirate into the house, for the wounded arm had been rudely bandaged, and was in sore need of dressing. Jack fetched a tray of cakes and wine, while his uncle bawled at the servants who came running with soft cloths and hot water and healing lotions. Captain Bonnet protested that the hurt was trifling, and carelessly explained, "My own ship's surgeon was spitted on a boarding pike in our last action at sea, and I have not found me another one. You show much skill and tenderness, sir." "The wound is deep and ragged. Hold still," commanded Mr. Peter Forbes. "You have been a soldier, Captain Bonnet, commanded for valor on the fields of Europe and holding the King's commission. Why not seek pardon and serve with the armed forces of this province? My services in the matter are yours to command." Stede Bonnet frowned and bit his lip. All he said was, "You meddle with matters that concern you not, my good sir. I am a man able to make my own free choice." "Captain Bonnet does honour to the trade of piracy," cried the admiring Jack, at which his uncle declared, with a wrathful gesture, "I must remove this daft lad to England to be rid of you, Stede Bonnet. You have cast a wicked spell over him." "To England?" said the pirate, with a sympathetic glance at the boy. "I would sooner lie in jail." "And reap your deserts," snapped Uncle Peter. "No doubt of that," frankly agreed the pirate. "And what thinks the lad of this sad penance?" "I hate it," was Jack's swift answer. "Will you grant our merchant ship safe conduct, Captain Bonnet?" "What ship, boy? You have only to name her. She will go scatheless as far as in my power." "The Plymouth Adventure," replied Jack. "It would ruin my uncle's temper beyond all mending to be taken by pirates." "I pledge you my word," swore Stede Bonnet. "Moreover, if trouble befall you by sea or land, Master Cockerel, I pray you send me tidings, and you will have a friend in need." That night those who dwelled near the harbour heard the clank of a windlass as the crew of the Royal James hove the cable short, and the melodious, deep-throated refrain of a farewell shanty floated across the quiet water. With the flood of the tide and a landward breeze, the brig stole out across the bar while the topsails were sheeted home. When daylight dawned, she had vanished in the empty reaches of the Atlantic. The brig sailed without Jack Cockerel. His shrewd uncle saw to that. It was not by accident that a constable of the town watch loitered in the lane by the secretary's house, and Uncle Peter himself was careful not to let the lad out of his sight until the beguiling Stede Bonnet had left his haunts in Charlestown. Life resumed its routine next day, but the boy's whole current of thought had been changed. He was restless, craving some fresh excitement, and hoping that more pirates might come roaring to the tavern green. He found welcome diversion when the Plymouth Adventure, merchant trader, arrived from London after a famous passage of 32 days to the westward. Her master's orders were to make quick dispatch and return with freight and passengers direct from Charlestown. Jack was given no more leisure to brood over his own misfortunes. There were many errands to be done for Mr. Peter Forbes, besides the chests and boxes to be packed and stoutly corded. As was the custom, they had to supply their own furniture for the cabin in the ship, and Jack Cockerel enjoyed the frequent trips aboard. He found much to interest him in the sedate, bearded Captain Jonathan Welsby of the Plymouth Adventure, in the crew of hardy British tars who feared neither man nor devil, in the battery of 9-pounders, the stands of boarding pikes, and the triced hammock nettings to protect the vessel against hand-to-hand encounters with pirates. The voyage might be worthwhile, after all. There were to be a dozen of passengers, several ladies among them. The most distinguished was Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes, Secretary of the Provincial Council, who was accorded the greatest respect and given the largest cabin. It was an important event when the Plymouth Adventure hoisted all her bunting on sailing day, and Charlestown flocked to the harbour with wistful envy of the lucky people who were bound home to Old England. There were sad faces among those left behind to endure the perils, hardships, and loneliness of pioneers. Jack Cockerell's heart beat high when he saw sweet Dorothy Stewart in the throng. He tarried ashore with her until the boatswain's pipe trilled from the Plymouth Adventure to summon the passengers on board. Colonel Stewart, blond and bronzed and stalwart, escorted his winsome daughter, and he praised Jack for his deed of courage, telling him, "There will soon be fewer pirates for you to trounce, I hope, my lad. The town will be a stupid place without a visit from the Jolly Rovers now and then," honestly replied Jack, at which Colonel Stewart laughed, and his daughter suggested, "Would my brave knight in distant England deliver me from any more pirates?" Jack blushed and was both happy and sad when the dear maid took a flower from her bodice and gave it to him as a token of remembrance. He solemnly tucked it away in a pocket, stammered his farewells, and went to join his uncle, who waited in the yawl at the wharf. Once on board the Plymouth Adventure, they were swept into a bustle and confusion. Captain Jonathan Welsby was in haste to catch a fair wind and make his offing before nightfall. His sailors ran to and fro, jumping at the word, active and cheery. Stately and slow, the high-pooped merchant trader filled away on the larboard tack and pointed her lofty bowsprit seaward. The watches were set, ropes coiled down, and the tackles of the cannon overhauled. The skipper paced the after-deck, a long telescope under his arm, while the passengers lined the rail and gazed at the rude settlement that was slowly dropping below the horizon. The sea was tranquil and the breeze steady. The ship was clothed in canvas, which bellied to drive her eastward with a frothing wake. Safely, she left the outer bar astern and wallowed in the ocean swell. The afternoon sun was sinking when a sail gleamed like a bit of cloud against the southerly sky. Captain Welsby held to his course and showed no uneasiness. Soon another sail became visible, and then a third, these two smaller than the first. They might be honest merchantmen steering in company, but the skipper consulted with his mates, and the spyglass passed from hand to hand. The passengers were at supper in the cuddy, and their talk and laughter came through the open skylights. Presently the boatswain piped the crew to quarters, and the men moved quietly to their battle stations, opening the gun ports and casting loose the lashings. The boys fetched paper cartridges of powder and buckets from the magazine, and the gunners lighted the matches of tow. Cutlasses were buckled on, and the pikes were scattered along the bulwarks, ready to be snatched up. It was impossible to escape these three strange vessels by beating back to Charlestown, for the Plymouth Adventure made lubberly work of it when thrashing to windward. She was a swift ship, however, before fair wind, and Captain Welsby resolved to run for it, hoping to edge away from danger if his suspicions should be confirmed. Before sunset, the largest of the strange sail shifted her course as though to set out in chase and overhaul the deep-laden merchant trader. Captain Welsby stood near the tiller, his hand clasped behind him, a solid, dependable figure of a British mariner. The passengers were crowding around him in distressful agitation, but he calmly assured them a stern chase was a long chase, and he expected to slip away under cover of night. So far as he was aware, no pirates, excepting Stede Bonnet, had been recently reported in these waters. Here Mr. Peter Forbes broke in to say that the Plymouth Adventure had naught to fear from Captain Bonnet, who had pledged his word to let her sail unmolested. Other passengers scoffed at the absurd notion of trusting a pirate's oath, but the pompous secretary of the council could not be cried down. He was a canny critic of human nature, and he knew an honourable pirate when he met him. It was odd, but in a pinch like this, the dapper, finicky Councillor Peter Arbuthnot Forbes displayed an unshaken courage as became a gentleman of his position, while young Jack Cockerell had suddenly changed his opinion of the fascinating trade of piracy. He had not the slightest desire to investigate it at any closer range. His knees were inclined to wobble, and his stomach felt qualms. His uncle twitted him as a braggart ashore who sang a different tune afloat. The lad's grin was feeble as he retorted that he took his pirates one at a time. The largest vessel of the pursuit came up at a tremendous pace, reeling beneath an extraordinary speed of canvas, her spray-swept hull disclosing an armament of 30 guns, the deck swarming with men. She was no merchant ship, this was already clear, but there was still the hope that she might be a man-of-war or a privateer. Captain Welsby looked in vain for her colours. At length he saw a flag whip from the spanker gaff. He laid down the glass with a profound sigh. The flag was black with a sinister device, a white blotch whose outline suggested a human skull. Captain Welsby gazed again and carefully examined the two sloops which were acting in concert with a 30-gun ship. It was a squadron, and the brave Plymouth Adventure was hopelessly outmatched. To fight meant a slaughter, with never a chance of survival. The passengers had made no great clamor until the menacing ship drew close enough for them to descry the dreadful pennant, which showed as a stable blot against the evening sky. 2 women fainted, and others were seized with violent hysteria. Their shrill screams were so distressing that the skipper ordered them to be locked below and shut in their cabins. Mr. Peter Forbes had plumped himself down upon a coil of hawser, as if utterly disgusted, but he implored the captain to blaze away at the besotted scoundrels as long as 2 planks held together. The Honourable Secretary of the Council had been too outspoken in his opinions of pirates to expect kindness at their hands. The sailors also expected no quarter, but they sullenly crouched at the gun carriages, gripping the handspikes and blowing the matches while they waited for the word. The pirate ship was now reaching to windward of the Plymouth Adventure, heeling over until her decks were in full view. Upon the poop stood a man of the most singular appearance. He was squat and burly, and immensely broad across the shoulders. What made him grotesque was a growth of beard, which swept almost to his waist and covered his face like a hairy curtain. In it were tied bright streamers of crimson ribbon. Evidently this fantastic monster was proud of his whiskers and liked to adorn them. The laced hat with a feather in it, the skirted coat of buff and blue which flapped around his bow legs, and the rows of gold buttons across his chest were in slovenly imitation of a naval uniform. But there was nothing like naval discipline on those crowded decks, where half the crew appeared to be drunk and the rest of them cursing each other. Captain Jonathan Welsby smothered a groan, and his stern mouth twitched as he said to his chief mate, "God's mercy on us, 'tis none other than the bloody Edward Teach, that calls himself Blackbeard. My information was that he still cruised off the Spanish Main and refitted his ships in the Bay of Honduras." "The madman of the sea," said the stolid mate. "A bad day for us when he sailed to the northward. He kills for the pleasure of it. Now Stede Bonnet loots such stuff as takes his fancy, and—" "He loves to fight a king's ship for the sport of it," broke in the skipper. "But this murderer—" "An unlucky voyage for the old Plymouth Adventure and all hands, mate." One of the women who had been suffered to remain on deck was close enough to overhear the direful news. Her hands to heaven, she wailed, "Blackbeard, oh my soul! We are as good as dead, or worse. Fight and sink him, dear captain. What shall I do? What shall I do? If I had only minded the dream I had the night before we sailed." Jack Cockerell sat down beside his uncle, a limp and sorry youth for one who had offered to slay a 6-foot pirate before breakfast to please a pretty maid. With a sickly grin, he murmured, "This Cockerell crowd too loud, Uncle Peter. Methinks I share your distaste for piracy." End of chapter 2.